Hello again, everyone, and thank you for your time and attention as we take a first look at place names in Gorwaa. So, collections of toponyms or place names are a common byproduct of language documentation or lexical elicitation. Simply put, people generally give names to the things salient in their immediate environments. And the more one comes to know an area, the more one encounters its place names, both incidentally while recording language in use, as well as perhaps during the process of collecting words for a dictionary, for example. Places where people live, places that people use, and other geographic features are, like people themselves, made unique by naming. So this talk explores the list of Gorwaa place names collected during the course of documentation for the first time, looking at what kinds of places get names and where those place names may have come from. In the end, we'll come out with more questions than we came with, but that's exactly the point. So the data that will be taken into account today is a collection of 250 names of places in and around the Gorwaa speaking area. Some of these place names were collected incidentally, like the image on screen of Muna Ngaida mentioning the place name Riroda when talking about an instance of witchcraft. But the vast majority of place names, however, were contributed by Hezekiah Cody, a stranger to none of us by this point. They were contributed by Hezekiah over a space of a couple months of recordings of Gorwaa lexical items in 2015. So Hezekiah is one of those rare natural-born lexicographers who've been making lists of Gorwaa words and arranging them into semantic fields for years and years, seemingly waiting for a hapless linguist like myself to meet him. And as the years have gone on, and as I have visited more and more places within the Gorwaa-speaking area, it became clear that Hezekiah's original list covered the great majority of commonly known place names in the area. So as such, a great degree of credit here is due to him for providing so much of the material on which my talk will be based today. Um, so, uh, First of all, I guess we need to make a distinction between place names versus general terms. So we have a common noun like kawi, which is lake, and so that would be the common noun. And then we have a place name which is Kawita Bere, right, which is Lake Bereko. The same thing would apply to something like Oma, which is mountain, and Kwara is a specific instance of a mountain. So that's the name of the mountain. You could say Oma Kwara, but Kwara is the name that you would give to the mountain. Same thing with a village. You could use the Swahili boring Kijiji, but the village name is Kash. And you also get something like Waang, which is an arroyo, dry riverbed, a canyon, and the proper name for a certain canyon is Kwirumba, for example. So this is how it would be animated out. So I'm not interested in the general terms, the general sort of geographic terms, the common nouns. I'm interested in the place names today. But this is not necessarily straightforward. It can be tricky. So Tarangire Plain, for example, in Gorwaa is just called the Eastern Plain. So Tsea, which is plain or savanna, and Dao, meaning eastern. So, but this is sometimes just reduced to the plain. So in Gorwaa, you can say Tsea, and that would mean the plain or the savanna. But generally, when people say this word, what they mean is the Tsea Dao, so the Tarangire Plain, the Eastern Plain. Yeah, so it can mean savanna if it's a common noun, but you can also say tsea, and that means the Tarangire Plain. What gets a name? So on my list, the most common are inhabited places, followed by what I call fluvial features. These are canyons, rivers, these kind of things. Then a smaller number is occupied by hills, and then we get lakes at the very end. I have around four lakes. This kind of makes sense in that numerically there are generally more communities than, say, for example, bodies of water in the Gorwaa speaking area. Habitations, of course, also might be nested within one another. So the place name Aya Aben is a village quarter inside of the larger village of Endabeg. And often these are consistent with administrative divisions and as such are corporate entities. So they have decision-making power and somewhat of a political identity, but not always. 7 place names refer to 2 or more places. So this is our list So for this kind of makes sense. So in the case of the first two, they are semantically transparent and refer to characteristics of the environment. So Hongumo, in addition to being the name of two places, is also the word one uses to describe a dry, infertile upland. And the places named Hongumo are exactly that. They're dry, infertile uplands. So it's easy to see why this place name is used for more than one place. The same applies to Ayatla'a, which literally means land of large stones. I haven't been to one of the places named Ayatla'a, but the other is built around a collection of rocky outcrops. Perhaps more intriguing are the recurring place names with no transparent meaning. Do these represent wandering place names given to a new location when migrants from the old one arrived? Was there a transparent meaning that simply became lost over time? Both of these would be interesting routes of inquiry. Conversely, several places have more than one name. So in some places, this represents a situation in which a more Gorwaa sounding name coexists with a name which is more Bantu sounding. Yeah. So in at least two cases of this sort of pattern, the replacement is certainly a Swahili word. Yeah. So we have kambi, which is the Swahili word camp, and the Gorwaa word is dando fura, which means on top of the winds. A further two examples represent what are probably Swahilizations of the Gorwaa word. So the Gorwaa place name is Memera, but then the more common these days word for that that habitation is Mamire. The same thing with Hamet is Himiti. And then finally, both terms, we have one place name that has two terms that are both Swahili. So the one to the left, Katanini, means at the sisal plants, and the one to the right, Kwasiratu, means at Siratu's place. Siratu being a historical figure, he was the Greek owner of the sisal plantation. Yeah, those of us who are familiar with central Tanzania will know that the Greeks were associated with major sisal plantations in central Tanzania. So this makes sense. Compared to the question, what gets a name, the question, where do the names come from, is a tougher one to answer. So an initial examination shows that the majority of Gorwaa place names collected come from the Gorwaa language, with the second most common source being from either of the Datoga varieties, and then a rather smaller number from Swahili and then English. We'll start with Swahili. As you can see, all of the forms are semantically transparent. Yeah, and either have to do with salient environmental characteristics. So chemchem means spring or water source, and at chemchem, surprise, there is a spring or a water source. Yeah. Or features of colonial rule. So this includes labor camps, cash crops, urban development, and perhaps in the case of Kifaru, game hunting or the ivory trade. Yeah, so these are the places that get Swahili names, and this is what these Swahili names often mean. The form that I am least sure about is Sharimo, which may actually be a Gorwaization of Shaurimoyo, which is a common Swahili phrase reduced and reanalyzed with a Gorwaa gender ending. And then we can move on to the three English names. The place names with English origins are quite similar to the Swahili ones in that they all have origins in the colonial experience. So go down is a type of storehouse for cash crops. Mutuka is a motor vehicle. And we have Oyster Bay, which is a place name after an exclusive seafront neighborhood in Dar es Salaam. And you often get a lot of sort of urban or semi-urban areas, places where the soldiers or places where the white people would stay in Babati, or in other small towns, they might be called Oyster Bay. Even though there is no bay and certainly no oysters in Babati. But let's move on to the Datoga terms. So the Datoga terms are probably more deeply rooted and may very well predate the arrival of Gorwaa-speaking people in the area. So I can give an example here.
Datoga-speaking groups were once more dominant in large areas of the Rift Valley in regions which have now been settled by Iraq, Gorwaa, and Bantu populations. And this is clearly reflected in place names across the Tanzanian Rift Valley, also found in places where there is no Datoga presence today any longer, and where the original Datoga names have become bastardized and superseded by Iraq, Bantu, and Swahili names, a process which should urgently be documented before etymologies cannot be retraced any longer.
So I used that pull quotation from Roland a couple years ago at one of the Rift Valley Network presentations because I still think that it rings very true. I mean, there is a necessity to record these place names before they've changed so much that we cannot trace their origins. In addition to what has been said in Kiesling 2021, I think it's important for us to think about what it means for a place name to be retained in this way. What does it say about levels of Gorwaa-Datoga bilingualism at the time of Gorwaa settlement, as well as the kind of identity that people assumed during this period? Tied with the number of place names is the number of place names for which I have not immediately identified a source language. I present the complete list below for exposition purposes. So I get the sense that some of these forms come from Bantu languages. So these are some of the ones that we have, for example, or they might be Maasai. But as of now, this sort of just remains speculation. Yeah. Finally, I would like to focus on those place names which come, or at least probably come from Gorwaa. This number is imprecise because it hides a range of 3 sub-assessments. That is, place names for which there is a clear Gorwaa etymology, place names for which there are competing Gorwaa etymologies, and forms which look Gorwaa but do not have a proposed etymology. Yeah. So starting with this last category, there are approximately 60 forms which look Gorwaa, that is, feature Gorwaa consonants or have Gorwaa syllable structure, but cannot be parsed in any straightforward way. In the end, these may be Gorwaa forms that will reveal themselves as such with some more concerted study. They may be words from other Southern Cushitic languages, especially maybe Alagwa, for example, or they may be forms from earlier forms of Cushitic, such as Proto-West Rift. Or they may very well not be Gorwaa at all, or from related languages, in which case we could add them to the unknown origin bin. The list of place names whose origin is Gorwaa, but whose precise etymology is unclear, is rather smaller. An example of the kind of issue that these forms raise is as such. So consider the form Ari, which may mean copper, a banana cutting, or a species of acacia tree. The first and last meanings are particularly plausible because you would have the name of the earth or maybe a metal. The metal is available there, and often communities are named after tree species. But more work remains to be done in order to determine from which place the name actually derives. What remains is a core of 60 place names for which we have clear Gorwaa etymology. I'll scroll through the first list just so we can have a quick look. So I'll just continue with these. Just to be exhaustive. And finally, for the forms which are semantically transparent, there's a number of major strategies. So there's founders, trees, physical characteristics, and animals. Places are just sometimes straightforwardly linkable to the name of a person, usually long since deceased. Even today, a person's house will usually be known as Aya somebody. In a couple of cases, the place name is just a person's name. So this is in all of these cases. Trees very commonly feature as place names. This may be due to their common use as boundary markers, but this also reflects wider regional usages. I immediately think of many of the major neighborhoods in Dar es Salaam today inheriting the names of the trees that grow or once grew in those places. Physical characteristics, somewhat related to trees, also feature prominently in place names. Dando Fur'a, on top of the wind, is a name given to a community located in a very high exposed area. The Yair Dangi, or Twins River, is the place name given to a place at the confluence of two major rivers. A handful of place names derived from animals. These may be salient to the place itself. So, for example, Pongai is located on the southern shore of Lake Babati, and Pongai is the word in Gorwaa for pelican. Um, and so, to sort of conclude, in terms of next steps, immediate tasks include reviewing Gorwaa place names suspected of coming from other languages with speakers of other languages used in the area. Datoga would be an especially useful start here. The same tasks should also be carried out with the purportedly Gorwaa forms for which no plausible Gorwaa etymology has been proposed. Going through this small set of forms with competing etymologies with Gorwaa speakers and perhaps even the inhabitants of these places would help resolve some of the ambiguity. And finally, but perhaps most importantly, there still remains the crucial task of working with the people who live in these named places to develop a sense of their understandings of the places and their histories. On the left is a still from a video in which Pascal Bou sits with his father, Bou Sakware, at the foot of the Kalalandi tree for which the village quarter is named, and he recounts the importance of the tree in marking a major historical event. On the right is a still from a video in which Paulina Laurenti talks about the Tsufe Ansi, which I translate as the fig tree portal, and the role of ritual offerings of thanks at its base as people pass through the mountains. A tremendous amount of work of this nature remains to be done. And I'll finish with my references. I'll start with the figures and then the references. And that's it. Thank you very much. What do you think, Martin? Tell me.
Of course, I have questions. I find it fascinating, and I'm really. You were starting with something about the Toga names, and then you say you have to understand this better. I thought, oh, now it is coming, but then you went on to the next topic. I think that is interesting work to be done. So why are these Toga names retained? But because then at that point I was mostly puzzled by the fact that there were so few Bantu place names. I mean, for Iraku that is absolutely the case. But then you came up with all these ones that are possibly Bantu or no etymology.
Yeah.
I think when we sit together we can maybe move some of the no etymology to questionable etymology. Ula, for example, is the name for Kondoa.
Is the name for Kondoa, yes.
Yeah, so that should be that one. But anyway, I have an impossible question. Like you were in, I find very interesting that you said what gets the most names, but I'm interested in what can get names. So I was among the consul in Ethiopia. I was surprised that all the fields have names. And I don't know why I was surprised, except for the fact that I hadn't heard it before, and I don't think Iraq could do that. So what is there to be named and why? And there should be more to be named than what we are used to. I mean, after all, I hear people giving names to their cars and crazy things, never to their bicycle. But I don't, yeah, I mean, why and how? I think that's an interesting point. Do people name things? And for the Akiak and a little bit for the Iraku, certain trees. So you had villages called after trees, which makes sense, but I mean, certain trees are so central in that meetings take place there that yeah, Koenig and Heine have it in the Akiak dictionary. They have actually names for certain baobab trees. So, and I was wondering for Iraku, I never looked into it about the valleys because it's complicated. I never understand exactly what they talk about when they talk about the valley. Sometimes it seems to be only one side of the valley. So what are the actual geographical entities that get named in that area? That is what I would be very interested in.
And how do you delineate them? Yeah, I mean, this is a
And why those things?
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
I should say regarding the Datoga, I do have an appointment with Herman up in High Dome. So I have an exercise book all ready for him. So I'm hoping that will come out with some nice answers, because he's usually quite game for that kind of sussing out of the meanings and things. So I'm interested to see what he has to say.
Yeah.
But I think from a comparative perspective, Martin, I mean, sitting down and looking at what in Iraq gets names, what's similar, what's different, I think that this would be really interesting. But then maybe also seeing what we get for Alagwa and Burunge as well. And then, are these older Cushitic names that were used before these languages were differentiated as different languages? I mean, it's completely plausible, right?
Yeah, I recognize some of the words for Iraku, and the fact that you don't have a meaning to them, it means that they don't exist in Gorwaa. So yeah,
Probably,
yeah.
unless I just don't know the common noun, but yeah.
Mm.
Any
Yeah.
other thoughts or questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
Just because I saw in one of the list where you kind of like let us look and like skip through, there was also animals
Yeah.
as place name.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, is that simply because of the fact maybe that animal was known in that place and that's why it's called this, or is there maybe even a different
This is
background?
the question, right? So like, so we have this lake sort of in the middle of the Gorwaa speaking area. And this is, you get really weird birds in this part of the world. You know this now because you have this bird list of East Africa and you have a million different birds. But like a pelican, like that's kind of a really weird bird. You don't see it very far away from the lake, and they're big and they're massive and they have like funny behavior. So that community became known as Pongai, just became known as pelicans. I should also say, Martin, this is just for you. Very rarely do we get place names that have singulative or plurative morphology on them. They
Yeah.
always have general number. And this is meaningful, I think. But anyways, let's put a bookmark
Okay.
in that.
Yeah.
Remember it for another day.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it when I get to Leiden eventually.
Mhm.
So they call this place just, like pelicans. So, even today that the pelicans are located there. With porcupine, for example, this is a bit trickier because porcupines come out and everybody says, well, they eat all of our maize, right? That's the biggest thing with porcupines. And they're delicious and they're relatively easy to hunt, right? Just get down and you can get your porcupine pretty easy. And they're very oily and nice. But like, are they there now? Are they easy to find? I don't know. Or just were they easy to find? Was that a place where porcupines naturally were anyways? Was there a farmer who was repeatedly getting problems? Then you sort of move to like the big classic megafauna, a community called Kifaru. Is it because, so rhinoceros, is it because like there were rhinoceroses in the area, like many over a period of time, or is it just like one rhinoceros was enough? We saw this guy and that's just what we're going to call the community because that's a big deal, to see a big,
like giraffe.
yeah, giraffe.
And I was just wondering because I don't think giraffes, they're like kind of shy towards people, right?
Yeah.
So how does it,
Especially when they're hunted.
how is that then the place named because you how
Remember that you have the Gorwaa speaking area, and then you have one of the most famous game parks in Africa right on the border. And in the past, there was no border. The animals just moved back and forth. So Tarangire National Park is a huge international draw for, especially if you like elephants and baobab trees. That's how they really market it. But giraffes, lions, really people are right on the border with this megafauna. They were all chased out of it in the past, right? So to have a community that actually is, if we looked on the map, quite close to Tarangire, you could imagine giraffes wandering in.
Yeah.
I always say that when I drive from Arusha down to Babati on my motorcycle, it's the cheapest safari in Africa because you often do see, you'll see animals. You'll see big animals. I see zebra, you see wildebeest. I saw ostrich every now and then just going by. You take a little break and you can see game animals depending on the time of year. Yeah. So the animals are very, very present. The animals are very, very present in this area and I think in the larger area. Martin, I don't know if you can confirm this up on the plateau.
They were. It's changing dramatically.
Yeah.
They're disappearing.
Stephen.
Yeah, I was wondering whether, so for some of these, whether there are kind of different local cultures that might contribute to the use of certain animal names or plant names or so on, where, you know, I don't know, like even if everybody uses something, then maybe like these people in this particular locale are more known, I don't know, whether it's a stereotype or not, or whether, you know, something like that, where it's like, well, these people, you know, make more use of this particular thing, and maybe that's why certain places come to have certain names,
You
even if
could,
they're
of
common.
course, sorry, no, finish your thought.
I was gonna say, even if they're just common items across the entire Gorwaa speaking area.
You could, of course, be onto something. I think especially about these ivory-bearing animals, like a rhinoceros, for example. There is, of course, a history of ivory trade in the area. So, you know, is that a legacy of bringing ivory? Was that a place where that was processed and sold? Possibly. Another side to that sort of question, Stephen, is that like many clans in the Gorwaa speaking area have ritual restrictions on what things they can eat and what trees they can use. Specifically, I know about trees, but I know that there are probably animal restrictions as well. So the idea of certain people being able to handle certain animals or trees versus others who would not, that's absolutely not outside of the realm of possibility. Yeah, so certainly. Any other thoughts or questions, follow-ups?
I was also wondering if you had any observations on how, so there's one thing is naming a place, right? But you would expect that a lot of the time these place names arise from, I mean, you mentioned in your talk like people using certain trees as landmarks and so on. So it's like describing where to go, right? And I wonder whether you notice any kind of similarities in the way that people give directions and so on, versus names.
Trees are certainly landmarks, even if they're not place names, right?
Yeah.
Go to this salient tree, and then you. I mean, the most common thing is people always say, "Well, the road is just one. You keep on following it, and it's never one. You get lost." Martin is laughing. You're laughing now. You'll laugh more when you actually go. Yeah, certainly they can be used as navigational beacons, of course, and also in the past. And even now, if you go to places that are less densely populated, if you go to an entire area, there is one house where a guy lives, and that's his name. You go to this guy, and you can see his house from far away. There's a little clearing, and you go, and as you were navigating, if it's hot, and you want something to eat in the afternoon, well, that might not be the most direct way, but you're going to stop by there because they're going to give you food and water and maybe directions to the next place. So, that's certainly, they could have just been places along the way. And this is actually a really nice sort of this is a nice sort of expansion from a methodological data collection perspective. Like, well, how do people describe moving through the area if you're on foot or yeah. So what does that look like, and how do they delineate one place to another? Is it trees? Is it people's houses? All that. That could be interesting data collection as well.